Okay. All right. So this is our 2026 Artist Talk series. And first up, we've got Zoe Nielsen. I'm going to share the screen so she can share her presentation. And so if you have anything you want to say before you start, you're, of course, more than welcome to.
I think so.
Okay, we're screen sharing. We're probably recording. And we're going to go into slideshow like that.
That's great.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yes.
This is not here. Oh,
This?
what? Oh, yeah, you can make it. Yeah,
Okay, and then just like drag it somewhere.
yeah.
Okay.
And I want to just double check that the volume's all the way up. I don't know why they're saying that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for bearing with you guys.
Okay. Well, hello and welcome. I want to begin by thanking the San Juan Islands Museum of Art for hosting this talk and to everyone associated with Alchemy Art Center for supporting my time here in residency. I'm very grateful for the opportunity and invitation to share my work in this context. Tonight, I'm going to be speaking about my MFA thesis research, which I completed at Purdue University just one day before flying out here to be here with you all. So while this work was developed in a very different place, it carries with it many of the same questions that feel relevant here around relationships between human and non-human life, care, and intentionality. And finally, just thank you for being here and for your willingness to spend time with all of our work. All right. The button did not work.
Maybe it's this
Try just clicking that side of the screen.
one. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Also, will you admit Erin to the waiting or admit her to the meeting?
Hi, Erin. Welcome. Okay. Okay. All right. Now the questions that sit beneath all of my work. How do we assign value to a life? Which bodies are protected and which are permitted to disappear? My practice begins with this instability and engages these questions through taxidermic sculpture, oil painting, and lithographic printmaking. I often work with animal bodies in many stages of preservation and decomposition, making work inspired by moments from my interaction with each body.
Check if this turn up volume is going to do anything. She's
Yes.
Okay.
Did it do anything?
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Bear with me. I'm pressing multiple buttons at once here. Okay. I want to acknowledge the words of Mark Dion and Robert Barbary and some notes toward a manifesto for artists working with and about taxidermy animals. Point number 9 reads, although we're making art, the material we use remains a dead animal. People have very strong reactions to seeing dead animals, no matter how they're presented. Acknowledge that this artwork will be upsetting to some people. Their words remain a guiding reminder of the emotional and ethical weight inherent in the work I present to you today. I hope to honor the lives of these animals and to hold space for the discomfort, compassion, and conversations that follow. That being said, proceed with the understanding that there will now be discussion of and several sensitive images of dead animals that some will consider to be graphic. So proceed with informed consent. There will be no further content warnings. So how did I get into taxidermy in the first place? I have had an interest in anatomy and an intense empathy for dead animals on the sidewalk since a very young age. This is a photo that my mom took of me when I was like 12 years old out in the yard, dissecting a dead robin with a pair of children's safety scissors. I was curious, and my dad always encouraged me to indulge my scientific interests, much to my mother's disgust. And I have cropped the photo down to spare you all the glare that I'm giving my mom for taking this picture. So I was like 11. All right. Then when I moved to Purdue 3 years ago and started grad school, three things happened simultaneously, literally within 1 week of each other. One is I took my first trip to Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History. And I remember being absolutely just blown away by the extensive taxidermy collection, especially the bird displays, which are pictured here. Two, My great uncle, who was a sport taxidermist in the state of Nebraska, passed away. And my family began the process of cleaning out his workshop and finding new homes for all of his mounts. He wasn't a particularly detailed taxidermist, and though the bodies generally look great, a lot of the faces of his mounts were definitely not right. Here is a bobcat mount that I ended up inheriting, for example. And three, I attended an open studio event in Lafayette. One of the people that was participating in the open studio was a museum taxidermist who had actually done commissioned bird work for the Field Museum in Chicago. So I walked into her studio and immediately overheard an older married couple joking about her being a serial killer, and just decided to stick around and talk with her after they left quite rudely. So we immediately hit it off and became fast friends. And she gave me my first two taxidermy lessons. One was mouse taxidermy, and the other was bird wing prep. And after those initial lessons, I knew that this was something that I had to pursue further. So I started finding old DVD tutorials made by old taxidermists and learned the tricks of the trade from them, as well as by filling in some gaps from YouTube. When I started out, I was mainly interested in buying or making taxidermied animals into specific poses to use them as references for my existing art practice of drawing and painting. But as I kept practicing and honing my skills, I found that I was starting to develop these really deep connections with the animals that I was working with, and it no longer felt right for me to be putting actual animal remains into the poses that I needed for my paintings, which at the time were focusing on animals that were suffering from bodily ailments or predation. It felt off, and I felt a little guilty about what I was doing or what I was thinking about doing with the remains. And I just realized that I couldn't bring myself to finish the projects that I had planned. And that realization and discomfort was the bud that grew into my thesis research. The animals I was working with were no longer materials to me. They became individuals, and I became really concerned with learning each one of their stories. Now, I work almost exclusively with animals whose deaths went largely unwitnessed, animals that died young or stillborn, roadkill, animals lost to illness, accident, or maternal rejection, really just any life that ended before it was fully realized. I encounter them as individuals whose deaths determine the structures whose lives are considered grievable, not just as specimens or materials or symbols. They are the weak and the discarded and unfit by evolutionary standards, and I feel bound to them by shared vulnerability. My proximity to death is not only philosophical. I live with type 1 diabetes, which is a chronic and incurable illness that requires continuous technological and medical intervention. Because of this, survival does not appear to me as something natural or guaranteed. My life is maintained through continuous intervention. So without insulin, I would die quickly within hours to days. And living this way has made mortality feel immediate rather than abstract. I live caught in a space between dying and being kept alive. It's often unpleasant, and it's a heavy responsibility that I carry into my work. It has shaped not only how I understand my own body, but how I recognize vulnerability in other animals' bodies, especially those that I work with. Western traditions have long positioned the human outside of animality, constructing hierarchies that determine whose suffering matters. We tend to rank life, human at the top and everything else beneath us. Yet biologically, socially, and emotionally, the distance between human and non-human animals is far less stable than we often pretend. When we insist on a strict separation between human and animal, we erase the reality that we are animals too. One of the most impactful books that I've ever read is titled The Undying by Anne Boyer. It's a memoir on her experience surviving breast cancer. Boyer writes, "In another life, I am a child who barely lives and mostly dies. I have often thought the same, but I am not a child. I am an animal. In another life, I am a young animal who died quietly, somewhere unseen. Darwin's theory of natural selection and the survival of the fittest do not apply to people like me. My body does not meet nature's criteria for survival, and if I were to choose to reproduce, it could very well be considered a genetic disservice. It assumes that fitness is inherent, genetic, and measurable, that death weeds out the weak in the population. And this is somehow necessary and even beneficial. That idea really haunts me because I am not fit. I am something else, precarious and preserved. This troubling premise of the survival of the fittest of animals intersects with my own body in artistic practice. I ask, what does it mean to be an animal deemed unworthy of survival? And how might taxidermy become a space for reimagining worth? This is the point where my work and my illness collapse into one another and why I'm drawn to the animals that don't make it. I find kinship in their fragility. I clean them, skin them, tan them, paint their faces, and reconstruct their bodies with the same diligence that I used to keep my own alive. Taxidermy in my practice is a method for remaining in proximity to death, but taxidermy occupies a really deeply conflicted position within visual culture. So to truly understand where my work fits within the broader field of taxidermy, it's important to trace the forms that it has historically taken, and how these reflect the shifting cultural narratives around animals, death, and display, and the tension that it often invokes in an artistic context. So time for a mini history lesson. Historically, taxidermy has served imperial, scientific, and trophy-driven desires to classify, to dominate, and to transform living beings into archetypes while erasing their singular identities. Although the first time I walked into Chicago's Field Museum, I was struck with absolute awe and joy, after talking with my bird taxidermist friend and doing quite a bit of research, I now know that taxidermic collections in natural history museums are built on violence. They are institutions of categorization, preservation, and careful erasure. I'm not saying that the institutions are evil. There is so much educational and social value that are held within these structures, but the fact remains that animals have long been killed not for food or survival, but for display, for data, and for control. Museum taxidermy in particular has historically prioritized the species over the individual. It flattens animals into study skins or mounts them into idealized poses that strip away their singular histories. Animals were and sometimes still are killed to be studied. For example, James Audubon was a French-American naturalist who lived from 1785 to 1851. He infamously killed thousands of birds to study for his illustrations, often shooting dozens or even hundreds of birds in a single day for the sake of his collection of drawings called Birds of America, which is widely recognized to be of great ornithological importance and features 435 species, almost all of which he shot himself. Historically, hunting expeditions were paid to travel overseas and bring back as many new specimens as they could to be mounted and added to their collections. Although this sourcing practice has fallen out of favor today, the animals killed remain in institutional collections, perhaps on display, or perhaps collecting dust in basement storage, like these off-display animals photographed by Klaus Pichler in the Museum of Natural History in Vienna, Austria, for his series entitled Skeletons in the Closet. Sport taxidermy shares this lineage. It is fundamentally about conquering and possession. A trophy mounted on the wall becomes a testament to human superiority and dominance. Primarily, sport taxidermists are male and reside in rural areas where they are less separate from the animals they mount will be killed. Most of these taxidermists mount deer hides on commercially produced foam forms. The only thing distinguishing one deer from the next is the size and score of the antlers it boasts. Ear tackles and bullet holes are repaired, and most other flaws are covered, erasing the individuality of the animal and rendering it to a platonic ideal of the species, with the price and value of the mount going up with the size of antlers or rarity of the animal. In many cases, sport taxidermy glorifies violence, exemplified by safari trips guided by a taxidermist, illegal poaching of wild African animals, and the breeding of animals specifically for fenced-in kill and mount experiences. Botched taxidermy gained recognition as a fine art form in 2004 during the rise of the rogue taxidermy movement, which was officially established by Serena Brewer, Scott Pipus, and Robert Marbury. While poorly preserved animals have existed for centuries due to a lack of knowledge or skill, contemporary artists began recontextualizing such imperfections as deliberate strategy. Grotesque, surreal, or humorous distortions that resist the polished realism of museum displays. Rogue taxidermy as a movement defined itself as a genre of pop surrealist art characterized by mixed media sculptures containing conventional taxidermy-related materials that are used in an unconventional manner. Its key elements include hybrid creatures, fantastical forms, feminist critiques of trophy culture, and an insistence on exposing imperfection. By making failure of preservation visible, botched mounts complicate assumptions about animal bodies, artifice, and death. Botched taxidermy stands as a deliberate rejection of realism and scientific accuracy, embracing distortion and irreverence, whether through glued-on googly eyes, mice posed on stripper poles, or squirrels repurposed as beer can koozies. Such works revel in error and absurdity, mocking the seriousness of natural history. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky because while there is sometimes some genuine conceptual weight to these pieces, I tend to take real issue with this genre, considering many, but not all pieces that fall under this category to be disrespectful, insensitive, and at times appalling. To manipulate an animal's body into absurdity, sexualized anthropomorphism, or grotesque humor feels like and reads as a second violation to me that just strips away any possibility of dignity. What others interpret as playful critique, I see as careless exploitation and mockery of a life. Regardless of my stance, botched taxidermy has found a wide audience. Some collectors actively seek out the most anatomically amiss mounts and fabricated multi-species chimeras, treasuring their eerie qualities as aesthetic triumphs of wrongness. Okay, history discussion over. As an artist working with taxidermy, I do the opposite of most of that. I employ taxidermy as an intimate act of mourning and a way of preserving singularity and natural, not fabricated flaws. To reject the Natural History Museum's fiction of neutrality and instead acknowledge our entanglement with the animal in life and in death. Contemporary speculative taxidermy as fine art, as defined by Giovanni Eloy in his book Speculative Taxidermy, opened another possibility, one that acknowledges death rather than concealing it, and permits the dead animal to retain a form of agency within what anthropologist Gary Marvin calls a cultural afterlife. A cultural afterlife is how a taxidermy specimen can continue to act, to represent, and to participate in cultural narratives long after its biological death. As Eloy explains, the biological death of the animal does not equate to the end of animal agency. A taxidermy specimen is returned a kind of individuality through the mapping of specific events that shaped its material existence. One of the most prominent names associated with speculative taxidermy is Damien Hirst. In Mother and Child Divided, a dairy cow and her calf are preserved and bisected in formaldehyde tanks. This piece caused massive public outrage, despite the fact that countless cows are slaughtered daily in meat and dairy industries. The discomfort provoked by the piece speaks to the power of taxidermy art to expose contradictions in how we grieve or how we ignore animal death. Another speculative taxidermic artist, Mark Dion, creates museum-like installations that mimic scientific displays and dioramas but disrupt their authority. His work underscores the politics of collection and the ways that animals have been presented as objects of knowledge rather than lives with meaning. His piece, Landfill, mimics a natural history museum's diorama, but with a twist. He created a scene of taxidermy seagulls, a stray dog, and a pigeon in an environment heavily littered with discarded human trash, all neatly contained within a shipping container. In this piece, Inert Wolf by native artist Nicholas Gallinen, a wolf, half taxidermied and half made into a decorative rug, lies limp on the floor, its body reminiscent of paralysis. The work speaks to colonial violence and to the way museums have historically displayed indigenous cultures and wild animals as if they were both artifacts of the past. Gallinen's wolf asks the viewer to sit with the loss of the animal and with the loss of the culture. So each of these artists, Hirst, Dion, and Gallinen, have open space for a practice like mine. My work enters this space, but insists on an ethic of care and sustainable sourcing. I work within really strict sourcing boundaries. A lot of viewers new to my work see the taxidermy and think about the stereotypes and history of taxidermy that we just discussed and assume that I have killed the animals in my work. I want to make it very clear that I do not kill the animals that I work with. I don't use animals that have been killed for art in my work. I only use the bodies of animals that died naturally, accidentally, or through licensed veterinary decisions. I do not work with animals that have been hunted or trapped. Thanks to the internet, I have several farmers and ranchers across the country that reach out to me directly when they have livestock losses. They then ship the bodies to me through the mail. I also have local connections like a shepherd from just outside of Indianapolis and a cattle family from Ohio that are within driving distance of where I live currently in Indiana. And I'm always on the lookout for roadkill victims, like this raccoon. Several studies suggest that 3 to 6% of drivers may intentionally swerve their car to hit an animal, most notably in the roadkill experiment conducted by Mark Rober. Rober used several rubber animals as the experimental group and a large leaf as his control, and placed them all on the side of the road where tires do not usually pass over. He recorded 1,000 drivers' reactions, and 60 of those drivers went out of their way to hit one of the rubber animals, while none of them aimed to hit the leaf. And variations of this experiment have been repeated several times across the US with consistent results. And these reactions can be attributed to a lack of empathy, a desire for control, thrill-seeking behavior, mental health issues, or of specific species of animals. Not all roadkill animals have been intentionally hit, of course, but regardless, their bodies on the road always draw my eye in sorrow. When I have time and the conditions are safe for me to do so, I often pull over when I see them, sometimes to collect a fresh body, and sometimes simply to move it off of the pavement and acknowledge that it mattered, preventing it from being crushed and battered further by traffic. I found this coyote on the side of the road, torn to pieces and barely salvageable. Encounters with roadkill are among the most visible reminders of how human infrastructure impacts animal death and have become an important site of inquiry within my practice. I mentioned having partnerships with several farm and livestock owners. Along with stillborn bodies, I have been gifted other animal remains. Pictured is a piece I made cast from a farm cat a friend found mummified in their barn. Most of this piece is made of resin, but I have included 3 of the actual rib bones in the piece. A litter of kittens was actually using the carcass as a playground when it was discovered, pawing at the ribs and chewing on the whiskers. Here, I cast a section of a cow's skull that contains the upper molars and premolars in pewter. I pulled the original bone fragment out of the ground behind a cattle barn, in a sort of group grave for the few beef cows that had died naturally before they could be sent off to a slaughterhouse. This specific piece came from a cow that was born in 2012 and died 2 years ago very unexpectedly while pregnant. She was just 2 weeks away from her calving date. All right. Now that we talked about my sourcing and why I work with the animals that I do, I want to get into my practice, which I consider to be sustainable speculative taxidermy. My process rejects standardized forms that are readily available from taxidermy supply companies. I was really frustrated with the limitations of working with store-bought forms and also by the implications of rendering each animal into a platonic pose that a million other animals are also mounted in across the world. So instead, I decided to learn how to cast each animal's individual carcass directly. Here are a few images from the carcass casting process. This was the body of a fawn. Most of these are single-use molds. I break open the plaster once I've cast it once, but sometimes I'll create another more durable fiberglass mold to be able to reproduce that carcass cast again. And casting each animal's actual anatomy allows the internal structure of the body to guide the final sculpture mount in a way that is honest and ensures a perfect fit. Every incision, stitch, and structural decision is made in response to the singular animal before me, and any defects or imperfections in the animal are not fixed to suit the platonic ideal of the animal. You'll notice some visible seam lines in my sewing of pelts. Although with a switch to a certain stitch they could be easily hidden, I have left several intentionally. They acknowledge that the body has been disassembled and reconstituted to insist upon the labor required to hold a form together and to maintain a body. I've come to understand my taxidermic process almost as a form of medicine, both as the wound and the act of tending to it. Giovanni Alloy writes, taxidermy and its resurrective approach to animal bodies has always been concerned with undoing death, suturing wounds, and wiping blood. I know this to be very true. There are many moments in my studio that mirror the care I give myself as a diabetic, testing and adjusting chemical levels, maintaining conditions, constant monitoring, and procedural, time-sensitive care. The test strips on the top right are used to monitor the pH of a liquid pickle solution, which is the stage of the tanning process that the fawn hide on the left is pictured in. The test strips on the bottom right are used to monitor a diabetic's blood sugar levels and make treatment decisions. I find that the test strips for the pH levels of my pickle solution are almost identical in size and shape to the strips used for blood sugar readings. pH testing must be done every few hours on the dot, or I risk the hair slipping out of the skin and ruining the pelt. And early on in my diagnosis, before I got a continuous glucose monitor device, I used to have to do a finger prick at least once an hour to test a drop of blood to keep my blood sugar within a certain range of safety. So the vigilance is constant, both in caring for myself and in caring for these animal skins. The fawn pelt, pictured here, became this piece, which centers on a 1-week-old male fawn who was born and bred on a high fence trophy farm. He had already been ear tagged as future hunting property to be bought and shot with an arrow once his antlers had grown to an impressive and unnaturally large enough size. Although he was bred as livestock, he died for unknown reasons, likely failure to thrive. I chose not to repair the hole from the tag in his ear because I wanted that history to remain visible. Now he floats slightly off the wall, bending towards a vase of fresh baby's breath flowers, nose immersed in the blooms. The flowers must be replaced as they dry about once a week, and the dirty water must be refilled. So the work, therefore, demands ongoing acts of care and maintenance. It behaves less like an object and more like a ritual, not unlike a mourner visiting a grave. So by introducing gestures typically reserved for human mourning, the sculpture destabilizes the hierarchy that determines which bodies deserve tenderness. I haven't naturalized the animal. In fact, I've denaturalized taxidermy and accompanied this animal into a cultural afterlife where it should always be cared for, maintained, and not forgotten. Okay, there it is. The most psychologically demanding work that I have undertaken so far involved the memorial preservation of a horse named Ivy. Ivy's owner had posted in a taxidermy forum looking for someone to clean her horse's skull after she was scheduled to be euthanized by a veterinarian. The horse had been suffering for several years from a chronic and incurable neurological condition. She experienced many unpleasant side effects, and her quality of life had lowered significantly. I was interested in the project as I felt a profound sense of kinship to Ivy and her medical struggles. I introduced myself to the owner and provided examples of my previous work. The owner and I agreed that I would clean and whiten Ivy's skull for free, as well as remove a diamond-shaped patch of the pelt where there was a small white star on her forehead for her owner to keep. And in exchange, I would have creative freedom with the rest of the remains. When I arrived on the day of Ivy's euthanasia, her body was still warm. I remember recognizing how recently life had left her. The proximity between life and matter was unmistakable. I was so aware that the brain inside had been firing only a few hours before my arrival. I met the tearful owner, and we sat and we talked for a while, and we stroked Ivy from forehead to shoulder. Mortality felt so near and bitter that it transported me back to my own near-death beds. I felt such a powerful kinship to her. Her death was merciful. There is no delicate way to sever a 100-pound head. The act required both reverence and violence, and I had to detach myself emotionally in order to complete the task, which is a tension that is difficult to invoke within a sculpture. And the experience clarified something fundamental in my practice. Care is not always gentle, and sometimes care asks us to remain present with difficulty rather than turning away. You'll see I have replaced the missing forehead patch of hide with satin and lace, which are the same fabrics I used while skinning Ivy's head. The finished sculpture rests now, eyes closed, the black form of the meat of her neck preserved. It is a memorial to a body that once carried pain and received mercy. This piece is a site of mourning for the animal and for my own continued confrontations with bodily mortality. This is a stillborn lamb I have worked with from start to finish. From skinning to bone cleaning, she has actually been depicted in a total of 10 of my different artworks, documenting different parts of the process through sculptures, painting, and printmaking. In this sculpture, I have mounted her hide standing up with wide, unsteady legs, suggesting a first attempt to stand after birth, an attempt that she, of course, never got to make. Her mouth is open, making a bleat when I know from the feel of her broken ribcage and non-inflated lungs that she never even drew a single breath. I want to draw your attention to her shiny metallic hooves. When young hooved animals are born, they come out with soft and flexible toe caps, sometimes called socks, that are designed to protect the mother from their sharp little hooves during birth. They then dry up and fall off after a few hours of walking around. But this lamb was stillborn and never got to walk around and lose them. So her soft toe caps are now preserved forever in metal, allowing us to observe and mourn the loss of life and youth. And one of the other 9 times I have depicted this white stillborn lamb, I became fixated on night grief while working with her skeleton. Her bones were so young and underdeveloped that the majority of them had not yet fused together, so I had to painstakingly glue 2 to 3 pieces of each individual bone together. And they were so brittle that they easily fractured between my fingers on several occasions, even though I was handling them with so much care. Once I fused all the pieces for each bone together with glue, I made molds of each bone and cast it in pewter, transforming extreme biological fragility into unexpected comparable physical strength and weight. And weight here becomes a proxy for the emotional weight of the animal's absence. Pewter, the metal that I cast these bones with, melts at a much lower temperature than metals such as iron, bronze, and steel, and as a result is not as strong and durable. So these pewter bones can be dented and even bent if mishandled, meaning that the piece should be cared for with similar reverence as actual animal remains. The white lamb that I mounted as taxidermy actually came to me together with a sister, a black lamb. Unfortunately, while I was making a death cast of the black lamb, her pelt became too damaged for me to be able to make any further work with it. So this death cast and a few oil paintings is all that I've been able to do with her at this point. I still have the damaged pelt and her clean skeleton. And now that I'm here on the island, I'm working on creating several ceramic vessels to serve as the final resting places for their remains. This sculpture is now attached to the top of a lid of a shallow circular vessel. My taxidermic practice does not begin or end at preservation. Alongside the physical act of working with animal bodies, I create 2-dimensional print-based works and large-scale paintings that document, memorialize, and extend experiences of care. I paint the act of skinning as a quiet moment of intimacy. When I perform the act, I try to create a peaceful and comforting space. I clean the table and lay down fabric and try to be gentle and present. Here, the fawn lies on a lace-covered table surrounded by flowers and the clean bones of other deer remains that I've worked with. This painting is about intimacy. It asks the viewer to see the care, the ritual, and the trust between body and hand. Many of my pieces depict the tools and gestures of my process: scalpels, needles, scissors, and thread, all arranged tenderly. The young parrotlet featured in this print came from the freezer of a pet store in Indianapolis. It was one of approximately 137 birds, mammals, and reptiles that had died in the store over a 3-month period of time since a new manager had taken over and started collecting the bodies. She posted it in a local taxidermy forum online, hoping someone could still love them in death. The photo on the right will eventually become my reference for a life-size painting where I can honor each one of these animals. In this print, Next Day Air, I record a moment of emotional resonance, depicting 2 stillborn lambs curled together in a cardboard shipping box with ice packs. Their shepherd had mailed them to me after they died, and when I opened up the box, I was really struck by how gently she had arranged their bodies. They had been placed carefully in sleep-like poses, curled together as if resting. They looked so comfortable. That care stayed with me, and I needed to honor it, so I made the image into a print, preserving the scene not just in my memory, but in ink and paper. Almost all of my prints from the last 2 years have involved a printmaking process called lithography. The drawings I create are very time-consuming and intricate, and they serve as another way for me to spend time with the memory of each animal. You'll recognize this drawing of the same stillborn white lamb from earlier in the process of the hide being sewn onto her carcass cast form. Because apparently the other 9 times I've depicted this lamb and my artwork just wasn't enough for me yet. And this is something that I keep noticing that I'm doing with certain animals that I feel a stronger pull to. They just keep appearing again and again. This little Easter mole was found by a Purdue student and his dog, then was gifted to me. On the day I received the body, I went outside and picked some fresh blooms and photographed him, conducted a small memorial service, admiring his smallness and beauty inspiring this print. This little stone litho features the remains of a few small animals I found around campus on a walk. I often walk around with my eyes glued to the ground. Pictured here are a small rabbit skull and foot, as well as the lower part of the beak of a small bird, surrounded by the foliage that was growing where I discovered them. I've been gathering small remains and other natural materials from around the island while I've been here. Along with some casting and mold making projects, I plan to stage and photograph a still life scene so that I can later make an artwork featuring the land and sea life and death, with many objects representative of what has struck me with awe or grief or frustration of man's trash and influence on the life of this island in one composition. As I've been here, my thinking has started to shift in ways that I don't fully have language for yet. The local told me that they're absolutely convinced that this island is a sentient being, something that makes moves to draw you in or push you out. And I found myself continuously reflecting on that idea, both as a literal claim and also as a way of understanding how this place exerts pressure on making and sourcing. The questions that I brought with me around death and care and preservation are still present, and they're being reshaped by this place, by the crazy biodiversity of life here and the physical act of seeking out and sitting with the remains of these sea creatures that are so largely new to me. I've been thinking about these animals as individuals with their own lives and deaths, and as part of the island itself as extensions of it. And that's introduced a different kind of grief into my work, something that is simultaneous and layered. It's grounded in touch and in proximity and the careful handling and arranging of remains. But it's expanding in ways that I'm still trying to understand and makes me really wish I had more time here, as I feel it's still unfolding for me. Ultimately, my work asks viewers to slow perception enough to confront what remains. My practice is about remaining attentive to fragile bodies, to interdependence, and to the responsibility of caring not only for the dead, but for the human animal world I hope we can learn to hold more gently. Thank you. Yeah.
We have maybe like 2 minutes for questions. Maybe a little. Yeah.
Thank you. No pressure if not. Thank you guys again.
That was
I really appreciate it.
That was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much. It's success. All right. Okay, stop the share. And then Adrienne is next, and I'm going to read Adrienne's bio. All right, so next up we've got Adrienne Renée Weiss. Adrienne Renée Weiss is a research-based artist and educator based between Chicago and San Francisco. She spins yarn, weaves, felts, welds, molds clay, and performs rituals in service of radical imagination and collective palliative care. Adrienne's work draws on pre-modern European magic histories, lesbian poetry, and textural imagery to lure people towards liberatory desires. She holds a BA in art history and American studies from UC Berkeley and an MFA in fiber and material studies from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And Adrienne has taught a floor loom weaving class, an intro to spinning class, and is giving this artist talk while she's here. So I am going to share the screen again. And then we're going to have Adrienne come on up. Or maybe, Adrienne, do you want to have your face on here for a second? Sure. Okay. And then when you're ready, just click that guy. Okay, cool. And then hit that. Share. And then hit that. Share. Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
And I think it's the down button.
So just
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. Also, I wanted to thank Alchemy for having me for this residency. This has been a really magical, beautiful experience to come here and teach weaving and spinning, and to make some ceramics and to weave in my little cabin. So like Katie said, I'm coming to you from Chicago and will go to my other home in San Francisco after this. I'm deeply rooted in California, but moved to Chicago a few years ago for school, to study fiber and material studies. But also, like she said, I am a multidisciplinary artist. I have gotten into weaving, felting, making soundscapes, video, performing rituals, pretty much just kind of like, depending on the year of my life, just kind of getting into different things. But weaving has really kind of stuck the deepest with me. So today I'm going to be talking about a body of work that I've been working on for the past 2 years, called Magnifera. And it is a body of work that centers a ritual that I've created of lesbians eating mangoes to create apotropaic magic, which is protective magic, to create these amulets, which I'll talk more about as we go. But first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my connection to weaving and spinning and metalwork here, and about my process and what I've talked about a little bit in the weaving class, about my relationship to tools and this very animate, alive relationship that I have with my tools and my materials, that I like to think of as like they have an agency, I have an agency, and together, if I strike the right mindset and balance, we can have this kind of back and forth energetic connection where art comes to be. So my process is pretty erotic, but in the kind of like Audre Lordian sense of the word erotics. And her essay, The Uses of the Erotic and the Erotic is Power, have been an incredible influence in how I relate to myself, to other people, to materials, to art practice, as being a fully embodied, sensual experience, that allows us to get in touch with like our deepest desires and passions. And so me working with wool and silk and linen and steel and any kind of material is an incredibly intimate and sometimes erotic process. With steel, a lot of my interest is in manipulating temperature and kind of this balance between me and the steel of like, who's topping, who's bottoming, and what role does the temperature have in it. And like, if you're not totally in tune with, the heat level, or the tools you're holding, things just don't work. So just kind of getting this magical balance between this steel, the heat, and me, and creating things like this. And so this is an image of my thesis work from last year. And like I said, materials are incredibly important to me. So I will include my materials lists, which are sometimes kind of extensive. And what else did I want to say about materials? Oh yeah, so one of the things that I'm doing with a lot of my woven work is pretty much most of my woven work includes the combination of wool and flax. Um, and so the reason being there's an ancient Jewish prohibition called shatnez about this forbidden combination of wool and flax. And because of my own relationship to my Jewish identity and that has kind of undergone a lot of ups and downs, breaking open, a lot of grief, and I actually don't want to talk about that too much because it's kind of unrelated to this bigger story about the mangoes, but it still is, it's there in all of my work. Um, so, you know, there's always that forbidden combination there. And also something that's super interesting to me about weaving and my kind of more erotic relationship with the loom is the role that tension plays in every single step of the process. So pretty much all of the tools in weaving are used to keep yarn in some kind of order. And each one requires some element of tension I guess, to do its job. And so, you know, with a loom, there's just like you're always kind of playing with the tension of, tensioning the break beam, how the tension, like how different materials hold under tension. So for something like this in the warp, which is the vertical strings in a weaving, there's brass wire, there's linen, and there's alpaca and silk blended. Um, and so when you weave with it, all of those materials hold tension in a different way. So pretty much the entire process of weaving this is like me engaging with sometimes frustrating tension of all of these different materials and how the loom holds tension on each. Um, and then finally, when you are at the end of your weaving and decide to cut it off, obviously there's this release and relief. And I do have a ritual, which I've actually never shared in a talk, but I'm going to share it with you right now. That when I'm doing a floor loom piece, at the end of every single weaving, I listen to, this is high drama, Ravel's Bolero. And right at the end, I cut it off. And it's done. So these are just some details. And another thing I'm interested is kind of the life that these materials get to lead. So the night before I wove with all of these yarns, which are here, I had all of my yarn piled in front of me and I was ready to get on the loom and I was like, I can't do it. I was like, this yarn isn't ready to be like put into its place yet. I have to take it home. So I took my yarn home, I put it on my altar, and my partner was with me. And I just wanted the yarn all over my naked body. And she did a photo. She's a photographer. She did a photo shoot of me in my bed with all of my yarn so that my yarn could live a little before being woven into place. So, and, I feel like whether people perceive it or not, I'm really interested in kind of the very subtle charge of materials and material histories and kind of the aura that can permeate a final work of art. So I don't know if obviously people aren't looking at this thinking like, I bet she laid in bed naked with that yarn, but it's there. And, I have relationships with my materials like that. So that's, it sometimes comes through. So another book that has been influential in this body of work that I'm talking about is The Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions. And I mentioned Audre Lorde. This was written in 1977, not 1978. And The Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions is a book about, it's like a fable about, written by Larry Mitchell about like a gay commune in upstate New York. And people who are creating worlds in a devastated city, in a devastated landscape. And so a lot of the work that I've done around creating this mango ritual with queers to create pleasure magic is coming from just an idea from this that's like we are living in a lot of devastation right now, and creating little pockets of community where people can dream and create new ways of being and practice new ways of being feels really important. It also feels necessary to fuel us to face the devastation that we're experiencing. And then another one of my influences are the ecosexuals, Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens. So in their book, Assuming the Ecosexual Position, The Earth as Lover, they write, embracing the earth as our lover rather than our mother radically changed our relationship to the planet that we share with billions and trillions of living and non-living material entities. To be someone's lover is more open-ended than being their mother. The lover assumes a relationship based on romance, sexual attraction, and sensual pleasure. The lover's relationship does not assume identities that conform to the gender binary and power dynamics of male and female. The category of lover is more slippery than that of a parent and avoids heteronormative family ideology. Our metaphorical and material shift to earth as lover holds the potential to create relationships between humans and non-humans that might lessen the destructive and controlling practices. The lover archetype evokes pleasure or jouissance based on mutual needs and desires. Earth as lover has the potential to inspire humans to give as well as receive both love and support from the earth. And I've known Annie and Beth for maybe 4 years now. And a couple of years ago, I went to Dusseldorf, where they were performing an ecosexual walking ritual where they were getting married to a park. And they've had over, the past since 2008, they've been marrying different earth entities. And so I was the ring bearer in this performance. And I also made some props. And here is us at this mossy rock that they called the cosmic clit of the park, engaged in an ecstatic breathing ritual to end the walk. So their ideas about the earth as lover have been incredibly resonant for me in the way I move through the natural world, and the kind of like I'm very much always paying attention to sensation and how I'm engaging with the earth around me. And so they've been really influential in their thinking and their silliness. And the other thing that has influenced these past 2 years is this object that's called an adder's tongue credenza, which I encountered in Vienna. An art historian of ritual objects and amulets shared this object with me, and I was immediately hooked. And so what this is, it was most likely commissioned by the Habsburgs to adorn the table. Well, actually not adorn, because it was functional. They would put it on banquet tables to protect the nobility from being poisoned. And so the way that they thought this worked was that these little things called tongue stones, you would take them off the little tree and put them above your food. And if your food or drink was poisoned, they would start to sweat. So there's a couple of stories about or lore that of how their magic happens, where they came from. Pliny the Elder in the year 79 wrote natural histories. And one of the theories is that during the wolf moon, these objects would fall from the sky and they were magical. Another story is that adders, like adder snakes, common European vipers, would come together on a certain phase of the moon and like start writhing with each other and spit all this viscous liquid and be, connected like this. And then they'd spit these magical eggs that you'd have to be near to catch so that you could take them and use them to protect yourself from being poisoned. Just the like specificity and weirdness of the lore around this object paired with its absolute beauty was really interesting to me. And also, one thing that I was drawn to do was to create an inversion of this object that would be something that could be relevant for today and for me. And the people I love. And that would be creating some kind of amulet, some kind of tongue stone that would protect us from the poison of present day nobility. So, between this, Annie and Beth's ecosexual adventures, Audre Lorde, the faggots and their friends, and then I was in Chicago eating a mango and I saw the pit and I was like, my tongue. And it's been a couple of years of that. So once I returned I spent the summer in Austria and Germany in 2024. I came back and I spent about a month on the TC2 loom, it's a thread controlled loom. It's a digital loom. And I was making all of these pieces that most of them are text-based, based upon the research that I was doing with Pliny the Elder and kind of creating my own lore around how to create magical tungstones. So this is a TC2 woven with felt embellishments, and also this is all the outline is hand embroidered. And just to give you a sense of what a TC2 is, here's a picture. Here is a file that I had to create in Photoshop to import into the loom, which is all of the heddles, which are all of these things right here, are individually controlled on a TC2. And what you're doing in Photoshop is you're assigning each pixel controls one heddle, and there are a lot of heddles. And so you essentially program the weave, each pixel with a different weave structure, and then the loom reads it. You hand weave it, but it's reading your file, which is controlling each individual heddle. And so that's a little bit about the TC2. And so this is a piece that I did, which is a paragraph from Natural Histories, the paragraph that was really weird and interesting to me. I know it's probably hard to read, so I'll read it. In summertime, numberless snakes become artificially entwined together and form rings around their bodies with the viscous slime which exudes from their mouths. The Druids tell us that the serpents eject these eggs into the air by their hissing, and that a person must be ready to catch them in a cloak so as to not touch the ground. They say also that she must instantly take flight on horseback, as the serpents will be sure to pursue her until some intervening river has placed a barrier between them. The only thing I changed was the pronouns here. It is what it is. But that, I was like, I gotta weave this. So I did this triptych, and then this is another one, but it's just the central text here. So those are some of my TC2 weavings. And then I was also at the same time starting to write my own kind of fantasies about how to create tungstones. And so this piece came from a conversation that I had with one of my advisors, Krista Franklin, who kind of like saw the way I was working and was like, hide words and things. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make an all white weaving that has text in it. And so what this reads is and this is something I wrote before I, started to actually perform this ritual. A coven comes together and sticks their tongues on mangoes like the adders of lore. Sweetness engulfs their mouths, their eyes roll back into their heads. They transmit their pleasure wishes into the cyanide molecules of the mango's heart. So I was starting to think about what would I have to do to use these mango seeds as kind of like these vehicles for like the molecular transit of wishes and spells. So I invited all of my friends. The first one, I invited my friends to a ritual in Oakland, which you'll see some of. And this is another kind of part of my lore that I wrote. On the new moon, the adders converge to make tongue stones, and the lesbians assemble to suck mangoes. And this is another piece that I did thinking about, obviously, the juiciness and the color of mangoes. And also thinking about like locations of queer gathering in the Bay Area. The Yuba River, if you've ever been, is a big lesbian party zone in the Bay. I mean, other people besides lesbians hang out there too, but there's a lot of lesbian stuff that goes on at the Yuba River. So there are so many nests of pleasure in the mouth of the Yuba River. And this is woven on a floor loom with an open warp, which, just to give you a sense of what it looks like, just to give you a sense of how installation makes such a difference with what things look like. This is kind of what it looks like hung up. I created these. I first did this. I created these metal contraptions to hold this up. I installed it, and I was like, I hate this. So it does not live like this. It lived like that for a minute, and then I was like, no. I like that better. But this right here, it's a hand-painted warp, and this little wiggle is a section of the Yuba River near where my friends have some property. That's that. So in October of last year, my partner and I had a show in San Francisco together. So just sharing a few of the shots, installation shots of the show. And the work that she was doing was also, influenced by the faggots and their friends between revolutions, and this paragraph that talks about the faggots in their gardens and masturbating in the watermelon patches. And so she, spent a few months photographing queers in their gardens in the Bay. And we showed that work together in this space in San Francisco. And for this installation, I didn't have the big central piece. And we found a compost artist that we collaborated with who brought her compost into the gallery. And then I don't have a picture on here, but she made this big compost spire in the other edge of the gallery. But I put all of the tungstones in the mound of compost. And, we had a compost fisting ritual, and that was fun, and it smelled really good. And there's my hands in the compost, and I think there should be a video right here of people in the compost.
next.
Yeah, it's next.
No. Oh, there. Okay. Another thing that I did with the mango seeds that like after people have done this ritual with me, or I have like an individual one that I give to people, I ask them, they give me their seeds. So I have a giant collection of mango seeds and I've made a small collection of artist books. And this is one of them where I use Coptic stitching and handmade paper from a good friend and paper maker of mine in Chicago, Eden Ann Frierson. And inside of the book, it's pretty much the ritual instructions. And so this was a few weeks before I came here. And this is what I was doing at the Yale Institute of Sacred Music. I was performing Mango Ritual with my partner. And a new work that came out of this is this breastplate giant necklace that I made out of a combination of the ceramic seeds and the just real seeds. And I also bedazzled an outfit for her, which has a tiny, cute little sequin butt crack right there. And this was fun. And then she also did a photo shoot where she took pictures of me wearing my breastplate. And so the final thing I'm going to show you is, don't start yet. It's a video of a ritual that I performed with a group of people in Oakland in 2024. And the soundscape I also made. If you feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry. Not sorry. But here we go.
Mm-hmm.
it.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions if you guys have any.
Could you explain that in the very beginning you said something about the reason that, or could you explain the reason why wool and flax can't be used together?
Yes. So originally, what I've read is that like pretty much only like the highest spiritual leaders could have garments made of wool and flax. And so it was a way to separate like them from the common people.
So they were made, but just for special people.
Yes. But now, like, I mean, if you're super, super religious, there are people whose job it is to detect the combination of wool and flax in material. Yeah. Welcome. I mean, also, I mean, if you actually are like using like protein and cellulose fiber together, like they actually don't behave very well together. So like part of it doesn't make in full sense in a fabric to have these protein and cellulose fiber together. So when you spin it together, it's kind of funky, but I like it.
This is just a comment, but just like all of the ways that you're weaving all these different mediums and these different like whimsical and like sexual and like ecological themes together is just so delightful and wacky and wonderful. And
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about you brought us right up to right now. I'm wondering what you're working on next.
Well, what I've been working on here is, and what I've been working on, for the past several months, along with some of this, is really different from this. Do you know the poet Adrienne Rich? So she's a Jewish lesbian poet who I think died in 20, I don't want to say, she's dead though. So she wrote this book of poetry, Your Native Land, Dear Life, which I've been reading for years, and I mostly will read it over and over in the winter times. And I've been thinking about creating a body of work in response to these poems. So right now, I'm working on a series of very small, intimate tapestries that are a lot more subdued than this. It's like just the work is a lot more like speaks a lot more to humility and just kind of like facing the bluntness, like the blunt edges of life, to use her words. So I've been working on that, which may or may not incorporate a performative dialogical component at some point. So that's what I'm working on right now. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Stop the share. Hello again. Let me X those out. Okay. So next up, we've got Katherine. I'm gonna read Katherine's little bio and then we'll start it. And did we decide if we were gonna just have them be up from here? Does that feel okay? I think that, yeah, great. Okay. So Katherine Finkelstein is an artist and teacher working with the medium of photography. She is interested in art as a site of collective experience that can build communities and worlds. She received her BA from the Bard College photography program and completed her MFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She runs Mother Box Gallery, an exhibition space out of her apartment in Brooklyn, New York. Katherine taught Introduction to the Darkroom while she was here, and she taught a cyanotypes class today. And she is here to give an artist talk. So I'm going to share the screen again. This one. And I'm gonna minimize that.
It's the when the photos start. I don't know.
I think it's that one, right?
No, it's downward.
Oh.
Yeah, it's I don't know why that happened.
Oh.
But yeah, it's the first one.
Oh, okay.
I think you just double.
Okay, and then we can go into view to full screen, maybe like that. Does that feel okay? I know we're gonna have like this up here. Okay, and then I think, yeah, like that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Do you guys want to come sit down? There's also more chairs. There's mine. Yeah. And then, okay, great. Okay. Hi. Yeah, thank you so much to Alchemy for having me. It's been a real gift to be here. It's still very much unfolding, and I'm really grateful I still have a week left. Yeah, so I'm from Brooklyn. Oh, wait, I'm gonna get my water bottle. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a teacher and photographer. I also run a gallery out of my apartment called Motherbox. And I see that as an extension of my art practice. It's very collaborative, celebratory, and generally just sort of following what people I love and admire. So I'm going to talk about one body of work today. It's called The Other World, and it was made between the summers of 2022 and 2024. And yeah, so I'm going to start. Okay, so in the summer of 2022, I received an invitation to the World Renewal Festival, a 7-day gathering in upstate New York. The invitation was from my dear friend Jess Green, a weaver and visionary who is a close collaborator of mine. I move through the world following my compass of deep connection, and throughout my life, this has always led me to where I need to go. How I met Jess is another long story I don't have time to tell today, so I'll just say that our connection was cosmic, and she is someone I deeply trusted and respected, so when she sent me an invitation, I always said yes. So I'm going to read you the invitation she sent me because I believe that words can become spells, and through the invitation, and though the invitation might read as somewhat vague, it's kind of exactly what transpired. So, okay. We aren't sure how to begin or what we are even doing, but we know we want to do it together. We have whispers, inklings, bad ideas, good jokes, and the capacity to feed some unknown future as much beauty as we can muster, and we invite you to stumble along with us. In the well-trod style of the finite utopia, we will build a tiny but significant world together over the course of 1 week, learning the rituals as we go and preparing for the great ceremony of our wildest grace-drenched imaginations. The best news is, no matter how hard we try or how perfectly we perform, our efforts will be insufficient. And like the lonely oracles or the Vestal virgins or the Scythian warriors riding with fire tucked in leather flasks, we will have to keep the fires burning until next time. So I packed 30 rolls of film, a black and white film, and arrived on a Saturday in a farm in upstate New York, where I was promptly initiated in an elaborate naming ceremony, drawing my name from a hat, the narrator. And I'll just say that most of the names were not roles. There was like Chaos, Weather Station, Truly a Pleasure, and Jess was Skunk Flirt. Leaving was always a big part of it, and Jess always set up a community warp that everyone kind of wove on, and at the end there was always like a cloth that we'd all woven together. So 2 people left early, and Jess was like, "We have to send them off in a grand fashion." She started baking flower crowns, and then everyone started dressing them. And someone shouted, "Don't forget your exit garb!" And then everyone just started singing, don't forget your exit garb. Anyway, it became this beautiful song that was like really hysterical. Like I was laughing so hard I was crying. And yeah, we sent them off in a grand fashion. The first photo you saw with the sort of translucent sheet was the exit portal, and they went through it and we all stayed on the other side, and they drove down to New York and weren't there anymore. This is some harvesting clay. I struggled all week with my name. I somehow felt that to be the narrator would inherently position me as outside the group, the camera distancing me as I was self-tasked with the telling and framing of whatever story was emerging. I didn't want to photograph an event. I wanted to be there. I didn't want to tell a story that I didn't feel embodied to tell. I humbly asked for everyone's consent to be photographed and told them that they should ever tell me if they ever changed their mind. But people were entirely receptive to my camera and seemed to mostly forget it was there. That's Jess. So Friday morning, Crumb de la Crumb typed up an invitation to a dance at a dried up beaver pond he had discovered deep in the forest. To prepare for the dance, of which we would be both the performers and audience, Crumb taught us exercises of contact improvisation. After lunch, our group traipsed through the upper meadow and headed toward the forest. We stopped briefly at the Time Warp, a circular patch of wild growing thyme, to set our intentions and to enter the forest in silence. I asked again if people still felt comfortable with me photographing the experience. Everyone said yes, but as we moved deeper into the forest, wading through a shallow river, Plinko Boat turned to me and said he was entering a space where he wasn't so sure he wanted to be photographed. I immediately responded that I would be sure not to take his picture, while my fears and insecurities of otherness with my narrator-photographer role bubbled to the surface of my consciousness. Plinko elaborated that his wish was more for me, that he wanted me to be able to partake in the experience too. I said, okay. We arrived at the beaver pond in silence and the dance began. People moved slowly, alone and together. I was feeling unsure of my position. Plinko Boat's comment had thrown me off. I had planned to attend the dance as an audience. I did not see myself as a dancer, a performer, and I was intimidated by the idea. But there was no outside here. Every person who had entered that forest, every twig and every crack of the earth were all part of the composition of the dance. I was holding this big, heavy camera, and people were entering a kind of primal trance. I realized that in order to photograph this experience, I would have to become a participant. I didn't want them to perform before my lens while I passively watched. I wanted to be in it with them, writhing in the raw mud of the earth. I took off my clothes to offer a level of vulnerability that no one had demanded, but this exposure acclimated me to a position I could work within. I began a dance with my camera. I work with a Hasselblad, a thick, heavy camera with only 12 shots of film per roll. I had loaded a new roll before we walked through the creek to the beaver pond. I decided not to take any extra film with me, embracing a finitude that aligned with the structure of the 7-day society. I took a light reading and began to move about nakedly in the forest. I listened to the weight of the camera in my hand as we outstretched ourselves to meet the dance. The emergent movements and flow of the big group and smaller groups kept aligning themselves into perfect tableau, framed through my camera by the trees and the light and the forms of bodies talking to each other. I pressed the shutter. This felt right. I was the narrator, but from within. I took my last frame and the dance concluded. So this is the beginnings of what would become the exit portal. We had found this old loom on the land there and started to build around it. Beginnings and endings were really important, and it was really important to sort of mark the container and enter intentionally as well as leave intentionally. This was the golden, well, maybe I'll talk about the naming ceremony later, but this was the golden cloth that was the threshold where you entered with and without your name. So this was a really important week to me. And yeah, I learned a lot that I carried with me, and I felt like this is what I want. And what this was, I didn't exactly know what that was. I mean, it wasn't just living in the other world forever, but that something really important had happened there. And it was how I wanted to continue. It was the path I wanted to be on. I think that having these experiences of building another world, you know, it was and the finiteness was really important, that it was 7 days. And we had this opportunity, you know, you got a new name and you got to think about like who do I want to be in this world? What's the world I want to build? What are the things we want to take from the old world? What do we want to leave behind? Like what do we want? And I think it like opened up a space of imagination and permission that was really, really important. This is our great fire at the end. So we decided, so we're like going to be doing this every year, this otherworld experience. But then in March of before the next summer, Jess was diagnosed with cancer, and at the end of May, she passed away. So we held a memorial for her on top of this mountain and decided we basically did we did the otherworld again, but it was a 7 day memorial for Jess. And, you know, she had talked a lot about how grief was going to be part of the other world. And I didn't really feel any grief at all that first time. It was kind of like I felt like utter joy and bliss throughout it. And the grief kind of was awaiting us that second year. So this was sort of a grief web that we built the first day. And so I should say, so the naming, so we a lot changed. There were a lot of the people returned the second year, but there were also new people who showed up, and a lot of the traditions were carried on, but then they took on new forms. And so the naming ceremony the first year, the way it went was that you stepped over this golden threshold and everyone sort of pushed you around. It was like, Katherine, Katherine, un-Katherine, de-Katherine. And they're like, okay, do you feel like your name's been shaken out of you? And like, yes. So you step onto the other side of the threshold, nameless, and then you reach in a hat and you pull out a name. You got one reject, but all the rules were pretty soft. So yeah, when I got the narrator, I was like, oh, like, I mean, like, yeah, I think that's right. But it was it was a lot for me to grapple with. Anyway, the second year, the naming ceremony became a lot more elaborate. Oh, and then also there was this song that we sort of would sing, or it became a song, but it was the Cosmo quiz goes both ways. And that was what people would sing while you were pulling your name. And I asked Jess later, I was like, what's the Cosmo quiz? And she's like, you know, like Cosmo magazine, like the quiz at the back of the magazine, which I thought was pretty funny. But anyway, so here we're all singing the Cosmo quiz goes both ways. There are these guardians, and then you dove off the dock, you swam to uh, this is, well, first year undeniable, and then the second year she was something small. She was also Jess's student who became a collaborator, and I thought that was really beautiful. But so you swam to the dock and then you pulled out a name, and then you swam to the other side with your new name. And if you don't want to swim, someone would row you. There was tons of ghost pipe. It was the summer, like in 2023, there was like massive rainstorms in the Northeast, and the forest was really flooded. And we were all together, kind of trying to find ways to grieve, sometimes explicitly, and a lot of times not, and a lot of times just kind of being together. Someone made a boat, or they put a sail on the floating dock. Hmm. Hmm. There.
Maybe press escape.
And yeah, Crumb de la Crumb taught us a lot of like contact improv that first year, which kind of kept going. And sometimes in more formalized ways, and a lot of times it was just like the ways we moved. I think being embodied was a really important part of it, and that took on a lot of different forms. Also, most of the people didn't know each other before the first summer. Jess was like a real weaver of people, and people came from all over the country. There were a lot of like artists and craftspeople and anarchists and activists, and she kind of always thought those people really needed each other. And I think she's right. This was a laugh cry ceremony that someone invited people to. There were a lot of invitations, and you kind of, I ended up showing a film of mine, and people were sharing it in all sorts of different ways. And that was also really inspiring and made me want to share more. Okay, so then this is the third summer. So we continued with it. Um, a lot of new people came, which was cool. There were some like 22-year-olds who came who actually ended up like leading us and teaching us all these dances, which was really amazing. Um, yeah, so here's some of the dancers. Always a whiteboard. So like I like to think of like photography for me as holding. I think there's like actually a lot of violent language, and photography can be like quite violent in itself of like capturing and taking and shooting. Um, and I like to think of it more as like holding. And also sort of, so I shoot with a camera that is you actually hold here. So actually it's like the heart's eye view is kind of the way I like to think of framing it. I saw a bumper sticker in a car that was in the woods in North Carolina that said "Find each other." And I think that's really important, and I think that's some of what was happening here. Yeah, this was the screen I showed my film on, this landscape film I'd done in from 2017 to 2020. But there were all sorts of invitations. So these two, this was Quizler's big riddle dinner. These two walked around with clipboards, kind of scoring everyone on the way they were eating, but you had no idea what the criteria was. There were lots of like costumes and parades. I mean, a lot of it was really silly, which I think is important. Also, so, Crumb de la Crumb, he had this background in contact improv and had been a scholar of Jerzy Grotowski. I don't know if anyone's seen My Dinner with Andre, but a lot of what Andre's talking about in that film is one of the best ways I could describe what we were doing. There was this very sort of like theatrical element to it, but there was no difference between the performers and the audience, and we were both of them, and it was not it was life. I mean, we were sort of acting, but we were acting as ourselves. And I think it was kind of an experiment in living and in thinking intentionally about how we want to be in this world. And yeah, this was one of the dancers. And, we went off and did this performance where I had 12 shots in my camera, and she would do these different sort of performances. And then I would take a picture, and then she'd move on to another one. So it's really interesting finding new ways to sort of collaborate as a photographer. And yeah, I really like to think of photography as collaboration, and not that I'm like sort of this like separate outside vessel. It's just my vision. Like I really like there to be sort of an exchange and an interaction. Yeah, and that's Jess's daughter Willa, and this is the golden threshold. And this is sort of our elaborate exit ceremony on the last night, going through the desire curtain. And yeah, every year, like the exit ceremony became a lot more elaborate. You know, we were singing "Don't Forget Your Exit Garb," but it would take on, like, the first time it was this hilarious song, and then it became this very melancholic song too, where it was like had such like soft tones to it. And yeah, sometimes yeah, I think about that song. It's very moving to me. Only a couple more. Almost there. So this is our 2024 exit portal. And I feel like maybe it's important to say that the other world didn't happen in 2025, which was actually, it was really devastating for me. I was like, this is what I'm doing now. Like, this is what I do every summer. I brought some of the entering portals to the school I was teaching at the time, and the kids and I all built this super elaborate portal to enter the school year together intentionally. We did this whole candle walk through the forest. And then, you know, for lots of reasons, sort of like conflicting desires and probably a lot of grief too, people sort of decided that it wasn't going to happen in 2025. And I'd been planning for it. I was like, I'm going to be one of the organizers. And anyway, it didn't happen, which was really, I was really upset about it. But then another thing that happened was that in this time also, me and some friends had been starting this weaving residency in Troy called Tangle Haven in honor of Jess. And she was this incredible weaver and had all of these looms. And so we started this weaving residency. And then we had our first resident in June 2025, who is this really wonderful artist, Pando Spears. And I met her. We instantly connected, and she invited me to her 7-day party that happened every other year in New Mexico. And I thought that my usual 7-day gathering wasn't happening. So I thought I should go to it. And also, I met her through Jess's looms. And I think that that is like a way I move through the world, is through these meaningful connections that sort of create this thread that is really sacred to me and knows that lets me know that I can trust it and that I should say yes. So I went to this 7-day gathering in New Mexico that was incredible, with all of these artists who were all every day sharing their art with each other in this way that was so inspiring to me and made me just think about how we give ourselves permission. And, you know, these performances were not like supposed to be at some institution or some like big venue and like that was the purpose. That's what they ultimately should be. Like, this is where it was all supposed to happen. It was just for us. And that is like more than enough. And that's like why I want to make art. And I also met John Bellows there, who told me about Alchemy. And so I felt that Alchemy was part of this thread that was stretches back actually before Jess, which is sort of the other story. But it's something I knew I could trust. And I felt that this was somehow like the next step on my path and that this is where I was supposed to be. So I applied to it and now I'm here and I know that that's true. And I'm still finding what's happening here, but I know that this is like a really important and spiritual place for me to be. And maybe I'll end there, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk about your choice to use black and white?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of a simple choice. It was because I was working at this boarding school teaching black and white photography. And I actually, most of my work before this, except for like back in high school, was color. And I like doing things for reasons like that. And that was what I had access to. There's an artist I really admire, Kimbra Fowler, and she always talks about availabilism, which is sort of simple, but it's basically making the best use of what's available. And I really, that's a great ethos. And that's also part of my apartment gallery is like, okay, that's not what you asked about, but maybe I'll just say that like my apartment gallery, Mother Box, I started because I wanted to show some work and I had all these amazing friends who were making amazing art. And it was always like, this should be shown somewhere. And I was like, well, we could just do it at my apartment. And that was 10 years ago. So actually, I just had my 10-year anniversary of Mother Box Gallery on May 6th. So anyway, I did black and white because I was working in a black and white darkroom and I knew I'd be able to have access to it, which is also why I'm shooting black and white here. Yeah.
That was also mine if it was just due to the camera that you use or if it's like a choice of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason, but I actually also I'm really glad it's in black and white because I think it sort of takes it out of time in this way. Um, I don't know. In some ways, I think it's important that these were shot from 2022 to 2024. I mean, I guess I always think that context is important, but I also feel like they kind of exist in this other world space. And I think that yeah, I don't know. I think like listening to things like availabilism and like what's at hand, it always kind of leads to the right choice. So anyway, I think there's other reasons why it worked, but yeah.
I'm wondering if you're finding that after this project and this experience, that your sense of the photographer being separate has been impacted or changed, and whether,
Yeah.
Yeah, where you are with that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that like the experience I had in the beaver pond of like becoming this like inside narrator was really meaningful to me and it's definitely something I've carried. And I think of it sometimes as like a document. I think I used to be really opposed to the idea of like documentary photography. I don't know, it just like didn't sit well with me. But then I felt like sort of documentary from a position of a participant was something that really resonated with me. Because I always want to be a participant, I think, in the things that I'm photographing. I think that is why I'm drawn to them. So yeah, I think that absolutely clarified that for me. I think that those were like values that I held for a while, but I didn't, it helped me like find the language to articulate it. So yeah.
Through these this like chain of connection through all these different chapters and phases of this journey you've been on, do you find yourself focusing on different themes? Chapter photographer, like your photography for the eye.
I think that there are some themes that always carry through. The light is always really important to me. That's also a big part of my gallery, which is like a natural light space. And I have incredible light in my apartment. And that's part of why I even wanted to ever invite people into my space. So that's a continuous theme. But I think part of the other world showed me that I was really interested in these collective experiences. And I think what was part of there's a lot of things that were upsetting about the other world not happening in 2025. I thought it was also like the way I was continuing, like the way I was able to connect to Jess, although I have found other ways, including in the residency we're doing and in other ways. But I think it was also kind of like really liberating for me to enter this incredible party in New Mexico because I found some of the things that were so meaningful to me in the other world actually were not bound by this specific gathering, but actually I'm able to find in other places. And there were other things I learned at the party in New Mexico too. And, you know, art was much more like, I don't want to say explicitly part of it, but yeah, I felt like this wasn't, there were artists here, but I actually found that I was really yeah, I don't know. Anyway, there were just all these incredibly inspiring artists that okay, so yeah. And then okay, sorry. And then also I think that's part of what is so incredible about Alchemy to me is like I didn't quite realize that it was like this art commune and that I had a sense about some of it, but I think that that's really important to me and that we're through the work trade, we're also like able to be initiated in, I think in a way into being part of the community and getting to really live there, not being these sort of artists who come in and have like these solo experiences that are like totally separate from the community and like off in our own like little art world. So there's a lot of, I mean, I haven't really been able to process all of it, but these are some of the things I'm thinking about. But anyway, yeah, so I think I'm like really, I think I'm finding that these sort of gatherings are what are feeling super meaningful to me and are things that like I think through all these experiences, they're things that I then sort of integrate into like the way I move through the world and also what I do at Motherbox. I think that each of these experiences has changed the kind of shows I'm interested in having and the ways I'm interested in programming that space. So I don't know, was that an answer kind of? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
I don't really know anything about photography at all. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your camera and the black and white. It seems to me like there's a huge amount of depth in it that I don't. I mean, like I said, I don't really know anything about photography, but I don't feel like that is that depth that you seem to be able to capture is common.
Well, thanks. I mean, so the black and white isn't specific to my camera. That's just the film that I'm using. Like I also shoot color on it. I mean, it is a really beautiful camera with a really nice lens. It's really sharp and it's also medium format. So, you know, if you like remember 35 millimeter film, like the negative's like that big, I'm shooting on a negative that's that big. So it's a larger negative. So it has, it can capture more detail and it also can be made larger.
Well, it kind of reminded me of pictures that I've seen of like old photography, like early photography, like maybe Old West photography. And maybe that's what it is the size of the whatever it is.
The negative, yeah.
The negative, yeah.
Yeah, maybe some of it's that. I mean, it's also square, which is so all of the photos are square. That's what the size of the camera is, which is a different what's that thing called? Ratio than I think. So it's a less common way of seeing photographs, maybe. And maybe in the olden days there was more like square photography. And I don't know, maybe also there's something like that isn't that I can't explain with like language or the medium itself, but like maybe it's something more like ineffable or something that you're describing. Maybe, you know, possibly, I would say. I don't know, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Are all these photos processed in the darkroom or you did all of it?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Last call for questions.
Cool. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
Well, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing this. Thank you, people on the internet, for looking, and stop.